The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Kensington Palace as Prince William stepped out of his vehicle. He had just returned from a charity event in Manchester, tired but satisfied with how the day had gone. The crowds had been warm and welcoming, and he felt he had made genuine connections with the people he met. As he walked toward the palace entrance, adjusting his tie and thinking about the mountain of paperwork waiting for him, he noticed something unusual. One of the royal guards, a man named Thomas Bennet, who had been with the palace security team for nearly 15 years, stood slightly away from his usual post. Thomas was known for his discipline and strict adherence to protocol. He never deviated from his duties, never made small talk, and certainly never drew attention to himself. But today, something was different. His eyes followed William with an intensity that made the prince pause mid-step. William slowed his pace, glancing at Thomas with curiosity. The guard's expression was difficult to read, a mixture of urgency and hesitation. For a moment, William thought about simply nodding and continuing inside. He had meetings to attend, phone calls to return, and his family was expecting him for dinner. But something in Thomas's demeanor made him stop. There was a weight to the guard's gaze that William couldn't ignore. Thomas took a small step forward, then stopped himself, clearly wrestling with some internal decision. William could see the conflict playing out on the man's weathered face. The prince had been trained from childhood to read people, to sense when something was amiss, and every instinct told him that this moment mattered. He changed direction slightly, walking toward the guard rather than the palace entrance. As William approached, Thomas straightened his posture even more than usual, if that was possible. His hand trembled slightly as he brought it to his side. William noticed the tremor and felt a small knot of concern form in his stomach. Thomas was not a man who showed weakness or emotion easily. In all the years William had known him, he had never seen the guard display anything other than perfect composure. "Thomas," William said quietly, keeping his voice low so others wouldn't hear. "Is everything all right?" The guard's jaw tightened. He glanced around the courtyard, checking to see if anyone else was within earshot. A few other security personnel were visible in the distance, but they were far enough away not to hear a quiet conversation. Thomas looked back at William, and for the first time in all the years they had known each other, the prince saw genuine fear in the man's eyes. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to speak with you. It's urgent." William felt his pulse quicken. In his position, urgent messages were not uncommon. But they usually came through proper channels, through private secretaries and official communications. A guard pulling him aside like this was unprecedented. He nodded slowly, indicating that Thomas should continue, but Thomas hesitated again. He opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling to find the right words. William could see sweat forming on the guard's brow, despite the cool morning air. Whatever Thomas needed to say, it was clearly causing him tremendous distress. The prince waited patiently, giving the man time to gather his courage. "It's about your mother," Thomas finally said, the words coming out in a rush. "Princess Diana." William felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. His mother had passed away years ago, a loss that still ached in his heart every single day. Hearing her name spoken so unexpectedly, in such a strange context, sent a wave of emotion through him that he struggled to control. His face must have shown his shock, because Thomas quickly continued. "Before she died, she gave me something," Thomas said, his voice shaking now. "She made me promise to give it to you, but only when the time was right. She said I would know when that time came." Paused, swallowing hard. "Sir, I believe that time is now." William's mind raced. His mother had given something to a palace guard? A secret message or warning that had been hidden away for all these years? It seemed impossible, like something out of a thriller novel rather than real life. Yet Thomas's distress was genuine, and the man had no reason to lie about something like this. "What did she give you?" William asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket with a hand that was now visibly shaking. He pulled out a small, sealed envelope that had yellowed slightly with age. The envelope bore no markings, no royal seal, nothing to indicate what it might contain or who it was from. But as Thomas held it out, William could see his mother's handwriting on the front. Just one word written in her distinctive script: William. The sight of that handwriting hit William like a physical blow. It was as if his mother was suddenly there with him, reaching across the years to touch his life once more. His hand trembled as he reached out to take the envelope. The paper felt old and fragile beneath his fingers, and he handled it with great care. "She came to me one night," Thomas said, his words tumbling out now as if a dam had broken. "It was about 3 months before the accident. She was different that night, Your Highness, frightened. She made me swear on my life that I would keep this envelope safe and give it to you when I sensed you were in danger." "In danger?" William repeated, his voice sharp. "What kind of danger?" Thomas shook his head. "She wouldn't say exactly, but she said there were people who didn't want her speaking the truth, people who would do anything to keep certain secrets hidden. And she said that one day those same people might turn their attention to you." The guard's eyes were pleading now. "She made me promise to watch over you, to pay attention to the patterns around the palace, the comings and goings, the whispered conversations. And lately, sir, I've noticed things." William felt a chill run down his spine despite the warmth of the morning sun. "What things?" "New security personnel who don't follow normal protocols, meetings being held in unusual places at odd hours. And yesterday, I overheard a conversation that mentioned your name in a way that didn't sit right with me." Thomas's voice dropped even lower. "I can't prove anything, Your Highness. Maybe I'm just a paranoid old guard seeing conspiracies where none exist. But your mother trusted me with this, and my gut tells me you need to read that letter now." William stared down at the envelope in his hands. Part of him wanted to tear it open immediately, to devour whatever message his mother had left for him. But another part of him was terrified of what he might find inside. What could his mother have known all those years ago? What warning could she have left that would still be relevant today? He looked back up at Thomas, studying the guard's face carefully. The man looked older somehow, as if carrying this secret for so many years had aged him. William realized the burden that Thomas had been bearing, holding on to this message, watching and waiting for the right moment to deliver it. It must have been an enormous weight. "Thank you, Thomas," William said quietly. "I know this couldn't have been easy for you." The guard's shoulders sagged slightly with relief. "Your mother was a remarkable woman, sir. She cared about you more than anything in the world. Whatever is in that letter, she left it because she wanted to protect you." He paused, then added, "Be careful who you trust, Your Highness. That's what she told me that night. Even people who seem loyal can have hidden agendas." With those ominous words hanging in the air, Thomas stepped back and returned to his post, once again becoming the perfectly still, silent guard that everyone expected him to be. William stood alone in the courtyard, clutching the envelope from his mother, feeling as if his entire world had just tilted on its axis. He looked around the palace grounds, suddenly seeing everything differently. The other guards, the staff members, moving about their duties. Even the ancient stones of the palace itself, all seemed to hold secrets now. His mother's warning echoed in his mind. People who didn't want the truth spoken, secrets that needed to be kept hidden, and danger that might be coming for him. William turned and walked slowly toward the palace entrance, the envelope burning like fire in his hand. His earlier thoughts of paperwork and routine meetings seemed absurdly trivial now. Everything had changed in the span of a few minutes. As he entered the palace, he made a decision. He would go somewhere private, somewhere he could be absolutely certain he was alone. He would read his mother's message. Whatever it said, whatever warning she had left for him, he needed to know. His mother had reached out from the past to protect him, and he owed it to her memory to take her seriously. William moved through the palace corridors with purposeful strides, the envelope tucked safely inside his jacket pocket. He passed several staff members who greeted him with respectful nods, and he responded automatically, his mind elsewhere. He needed privacy, complete and absolute privacy, before he opened his mother's letter. The question was where to find it in a palace filled with security cameras, staff, and the ever-present possibility of being interrupted. He considered his private study, but quickly dismissed the idea. Too many people knew where to find him there, and his private secretary had a habit of barging in with urgent matters. His bedroom was another option, but even that felt too exposed somehow. Then he remembered a place he hadn't visited in years. A small room tucked away in one of the older sections of the palace that his mother had loved. It had been a music room once. A place where Diana would sometimes play piano when she needed to escape the pressures of royal life. After her death, the room had been quietly closed off, preserved but unused, too painful for the family to enter. William hadn't been inside since he was a teenager, but he remembered it clearly. More importantly, he remembered that it was one of the few rooms in the palace without modern security upgrades. No cameras, no microphones, just for walls and memories. He changed direction, heading toward the older wing of the palace. The corridors here were narrower, the walls lined with portraits of long-dead royals who stared down at him with knowing eyes. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floors, and he passed no one. This part of the palace was rarely used, preserved more for historical significance than any practical purpose. When he reached the music room door, his hand hesitated on the handle. Opening this door meant confronting memories he had carefully boxed away. But his mother's letter demanded it. He turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was exactly as he remembered it. A grand piano stood in the center, covered with a white cloth to protect it from dust. The walls were painted a soft cream color that his mother had chosen, and the windows looked out onto a private garden that had grown wild over the years. The air smelled of old wood and the faint lingering scent of his mother's perfume, though that was surely his imagination. William closed the door behind him and locked it, then walked to the window to ensure no one was in the garden below. Satisfied that he was truly alone, he pulled the envelope from his pocket and sat down at his mother's piano bench. The cloth covering the piano had slipped slightly, revealing the polished wood beneath. He set the envelope down carefully, staring at his name written in his mother's hand. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal. The envelope had been closed for so many years that the glue had become brittle, and it opened easily. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. William unfolded it slowly, almost afraid of what he might find. When he saw the date at the top, his heart clenched. June 1997. 3 months before his mother died, just as Thomas had said. The letter began simply. "My dearest William, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are in danger." William felt tears spring to his eyes, but he blinked them away, forcing himself to focus on the words. His mother's handwriting flowed across the page in the graceful curves he remembered so well from birthday. Cards and notes she would leave for him. I don't know how to begin this letter or how to tell you what I've learned. Part of me hopes you never have to read these words, that I am wrong about everything, and I'm just being paranoid. But I can't take that chance. You are my son, and protecting you matters more than anything else in this world. William's hand tightened on the paper. He could almost hear his mother's voice speaking these words. Imagine her sitting at this very piano, agonizing over what to write. For the past year, I have been documenting things I've seen and heard. Conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Meetings that were never recorded in official schedules. Phone calls that were made from secure lines with no explanation. At first, I thought I was imagining patterns where none existed. But the more I paid attention, the more certain I became that something was very wrong. The letter went on to describe specific incidents. Diana wrote about a meeting. She had accidentally walked in on between several high-ranking officials and people she described as strangers with military bearing. Wrote about documents she had glimpsed on her husband's desk that referenced operations with code names she didn't understand. Most troubling of all, she wrote about a conversation she had overheard where her own name was mentioned, along with words like problem and liability. I started asking questions. The letter continued. I tried to be subtle about it, but I must have pushed too hard or asked the wrong person because things changed. I began to notice cars following me. My phone would make strange clicking sounds. And people I had trusted for years suddenly became distant and cold. William felt a growing sense of dread as he read. His mother had been investigating something, and her investigation had made someone nervous. The official story of her death had always been that it was a tragic accident, a drunk driver and bad luck. But his mother's words suggested something far darker. I've made copies of documents I found and hidden them in a place only you will know. I've also compiled a list of names, people who I believe are involved in whatever is happening. but William, you must be careful. These are powerful people, people who have access to resources and influence that most cannot imagine. If they felt threatened enough to move against me, they won't hesitate to move against you." The letter included specific instructions. His mother described a safety deposit box at a bank in Switzerland, registered under a false name she had created years ago. The box contained the documents she had mentioned, along with more detailed explanations of what she had discovered. She provided the name on the account and a password that only William would know. A phrase from a bedtime story she used to tell him when he was a child. "I don't know exactly what they're planning," Diana wrote, "but I know it involves maintaining power and control at any cost. There are people within the establishment who believe that the monarchy must be preserved in a very specific way, and anyone who threatens that vision is a problem to be solved. I became a problem, William, because I spoke too freely and cared too much about the wrong things." William's vision blurred with tears now, and he didn't try to stop them. His mother's words painted a picture of fear and isolation, of a woman who knew she was in danger but felt she had no one to turn to. He thought about all the conspiracy theories that had circulated after her death, theories he had always dismissed as the fevered imaginings of people who couldn't accept a simple tragic accident. But what if they hadn't been entirely wrong? If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me, and now you're facing a similar threat. Trust your instincts, William. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't assume that anyone is above suspicion just because of their position or title. And whatever you do, don't go to the authorities until you know exactly who you can trust. The letter ended with words that broke William's heart. "I'm so sorry to burden you with this. You deserve a normal life, a chance to grow up without these shadows hanging over you. But you were born into a position that comes with both privilege and danger, and I need you to be aware of both. I love you more than words can express. Stay safe, my darling boy. Always remember that you have your own strength, your own voice. Use them wisely. Love always, Mom." William sat in silence for a long time after finishing the letter, staring at his mother's signature. The implications of what he had just read were staggering. If his mother was right, if there truly was some kind of conspiracy within the establishment, then her death might not have been an accident at all. And if they had been willing to eliminate her, what would stop them from doing the same to him if he became too much of a problem? He thought about Thomas's words, about the unusual activity the guard had noticed recently. New security personnel, odd meetings, conversations that stopped when others approached. Were these the same patterns his mother had observed? Had history begun repeating itself? William stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the overgrown garden. His mother had loved that garden, had spent hours there with him and Harry when they were children. Those had been simpler times before he understood the complexities and dangers that came with his position. But he wasn't a child anymore. He was a grown man with a family of his own to protect. He couldn't afford to ignore his mother's warning. The question was what to do next. His mother had left him instructions to access documents she had hidden. That would mean traveling to Switzerland without drawing attention to why. He would need to be clever about it, perhaps combine it with some official duty or charity work. And he would need to be careful about who he told, if anyone at all. He looked down at the letter again, memorizing the details his mother had provided. Then he carefully refolded it and placed it back in the envelope. He couldn't keep it with him, too risky if someone searched his belongings. But he needed to hide it somewhere safe, somewhere only he would think to look. His eyes fell on the piano. Moving quickly, he lifted the cloth covering and opened the lid. The inside of a piano was a maze of strings and hammers, but William knew that there were small spaces where something flat like an envelope could be hidden. He carefully tucked the envelope into a gap near the back of the instrument, replacing the cloth exactly as it had been. As he stood there, a soft knock on the door made him jump. His heart raced as he turned toward the sound. William froze at the sound of the knock, his mind racing through possibilities of who might have followed him to this forgotten corner of the palace. He quickly composed himself, straightening his jacket and taking a deep breath before approaching the door. His hand rested on the handle for a moment as another knock came. More insistent this time. "It's just a moment," he called out. Trying to keep his voice steady and normal, he unlocked the door and opened it to find Catherine standing there. concern etched across her face. His wife looked him up and down, her eyes searching his expression for clues about what was wrong. They had been married long enough that she could read him like an open book, and she clearly sensed that something significant had happened. "They told me you came back an hour ago, but you never went to your study," Catherine said softly. "I've been looking everywhere for you. What are you doing in here? This room has been closed for years." Liam stepped back to let her enter, closing the door behind her. For a moment he considered lying, telling her he had just needed some time alone to think. But as he looked at his wife's worried face, he realized that he couldn't carry this burden alone. His mother had been isolated with her fears and suspicions, and that isolation had perhaps been part of what made her vulnerable. He wouldn't make the same mistake. "Something happened this morning," he began, gesturing for her to sit on the piano bench. "Thomas, one of the guards, pulled me aside. He gave me a letter." Catherine's eyes widened. "A letter from whom?" "From my mother." The words hung in the air between them. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth, and she sat down heavily on the bench. She had never met Diana, but she knew how much William still missed his mother. How the loss still affected him even after all these years. How was that possible? Catherine whispered. William explained everything. Thomas approaching him, the sealed envelope with his name in his mother's handwriting. The guard's observations about unusual activity around the palace. As he spoke, Catherine's expression shifted from shock to concern to something that looked almost like fear. "Where's the letter now?" she asked when he finished. William gestured toward the piano. "I hid it inside. I couldn't risk keeping it on me." He paused, studying his wife's face. "Catherine, if even half of what my mother wrote is true, then we're in a very delicate situation. She believed there were people within the establishment who saw her as a threat, and she warned me that I might face the same danger." Catherine stood up and walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. William could see her processing the information, her logical mind working through the implications. After a long moment, she turned back to him. "We need to think about this carefully," she said, her voice steady, despite the gravity of what they were discussing. "Your mother left you instructions to access documents she hid. That's your first step. But you're right that we need to be smart about how we approach this. If there really are people watching, we can't give them any reason to suspect you've received a warning." William nodded, grateful for her calm response. "I was thinking I could plan a trip to Switzerland, perhaps for a charity visit. Something that wouldn't seem out of the ordinary." "That could work," Catherine agreed. "But William, we also need to consider who we can trust. Your mother warned you not to go to authorities until you know who's safe. That means we need to be very careful about who knows what we're doing." They spent the next hour discussing strategies and possibilities. Catherine suggested that they should act as normally as possible while quietly investigating. They would attend their scheduled events, fulfill their royal duties, and give no indication that anything had changed. Meanwhile, William would begin planning his trip to Switzerland, and they would both start paying closer attention to the patterns around them, just as Thomas had been doing. "There's something else we need to consider," Catherine said hesitantly. "Your children. If there's any real danger, we need to think about their safety too." The thought of his children being in any kind of danger made William's blood run cold. George, Charlotte, and Louis were innocent, far too young to be caught up in whatever dark games were being played in the shadows of power. He had always known that his position came with certain risks, but the idea that those risks might extend to his children was almost unbearable. "We'll increase their security," he said firmly, "but we'll do it in a way that doesn't alarm anyone or make it obvious why we're doing it. Perhaps we can say there have been general threats, nothing specific, just an abundance of caution." Over the following days, William threw himself into his regular duties with renewed focus. But beneath the surface, his mind was constantly working. He watched the people around him with new eyes, noting small details he might have overlooked before. An aide who seemed too interested in his schedule. A security officer who asked questions that seemed just slightly off. A government liaison who appeared at events where his presence wasn't strictly necessary. He wasn't sure if he was being paranoid or appropriately cautious. And that uncertainty was maddening. Every smile could be genuine or could be hiding something sinister. Every helpful gesture could be exactly what it appeared to be, or it could be part of some larger manipulation. He found himself questioning everything and everyone. Thomas remained at his post, as professional and unobtrusive as ever. But now William noticed the guard's subtle vigilance. The way his eyes tracked certain individuals, the slight tension in his posture when particular people were near. They never spoke again about the letter, but there was an understanding between them now, a shared awareness of potential threats. William also began researching historical patterns. Looking through old records and news reports from the time of his mother's death. He did this late at night, when the palace was quiet and he could be reasonably certain of privacy. The official accounts were familiar to him, of course. The car crash in Paris, the paparazzi chase, the drunk driver. But now he looked for inconsistencies, for details that didn't quite add up. He found several. Small things that most people would overlook. Witness statements that contradicted each other. Security footage that was mysteriously unavailable. An investigation that seemed to conclude very quickly, perhaps too quickly for something so complex. Individually, these inconsistencies could be explained away. Together, they formed a pattern that was deeply troubling. Catherine helped him research. The two of them working together late into the night, piecing together fragments of information. They were careful to clear their browser histories and use private computers when possible. They communicated about sensitive matters only in person, never over the phone or through email. It felt absurdly cloak and dagger, like they were characters in some espionage thriller, rather than members of the royal family going about their lives. 2 weeks after receiving the letter, William attended a state dinner with numerous government officials and foreign dignitaries. It was a grand affair, the kind of event he had attended hundreds of times before. But tonight felt different. As he moved through the crowd, making small talk and smiling for cameras, he noticed a man he didn't recognize speaking with one of the senior palace officials. The man was in his 50s, well-dressed, but with the bearing of someone military or intelligence. He wasn't on the official guest list. William was certain of that. He had memorized the list, as he always did, and this face wasn't among them. When the man's eyes met William's across the room, there was a flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or assessment. The man smiled and nodded politely before turning back to his conversation. William forced himself to move on, to not stare or show any particular interest. But his heart was racing. He made his way to where Catherine was speaking with an ambassador and gently touched her arm. She read his signal immediately and excused herself from the conversation. "What's wrong?" she whispered as they moved toward a quieter corner. "That man by the window, speaking with Lord Hampton. Do you recognize him?" Catherine glanced over casually. "No, should I? He's not on the guest list." They both knew what that meant. State dinners had strict security protocols. Everyone who attended was vetted and cleared weeks in advance. For someone to be present who wasn't on the official list suggested either a serious security breach or something more deliberate. William caught the eye of the head of security, a man named Robert Davies, who had been with the Royal Protection Team for 12 years. Robert approached discreetly, and William posed his question quietly. "The gentleman by the window with Lord Hampton? I don't believe I've been introduced." Robert's eyes flicked toward the man, and William saw a brief moment of confusion cross the security chief's face before it was replaced by a carefully neutral expression. "I'll look into it immediately, Your Royal Highness." But as Robert moved away, William noticed that he didn't head toward the mystery man. Instead, he pulled out his phone and sent a quick text, to whom William couldn't see. And when Robert finally did approach Lord Hampton and the stranger, the conversation seemed cordial, even friendly. No one asked the man to leave. No one questioned his presence. After a few minutes, Robert returned to William. "My apologies, sir. That's James Thornton, an advisor to the Home Office. He was added to the guest list at the last minute due to some upcoming policy discussions. The update must not have made it to your briefing materials." The explanation was smooth, professional, entirely reasonable. But something about it felt wrong to William. The way Robert had hesitated before approaching the man. The way the stranger had smiled when they spoke as if sharing a private joke. And most troubling of all, the fact that Robert had needed to text someone before providing an answer. as if he didn't actually know who the man was and had to ask. William nodded and thanked Robert, giving no indication that he doubted the explanation. But his mind was racing. Was this the kind of thing his mother had noticed? Small irregularities that individually meant nothing but together formed a disturbing pattern. That night, after the dinner had ended and they were alone in their private quarters, William told Catherine what had happened. They agreed that they needed to accelerate their plans. Waiting months to travel to Switzerland suddenly seemed too long. Whatever was happening, it felt like it was escalating. "I'll arrange the trip for next month," William said. "We'll make it part of a larger tour. Several countries, multiple stops. That way Switzerland won't stand out as the main destination." Catherine nodded, then added something that chilled him. "William, when your mother wrote that letter, she must have known how dangerous it was to investigate these people. And she did it anyway because she felt it was important. If we're going to follow through on this, we need to be prepared for what we might find and what it might cost us." The month that followed was perhaps the most stressful of William's life. On the surface, everything appeared normal. He attended charity events, met with officials, spent time with his family, and fulfilled all his royal duties with the same dedication he always had. But underneath, he was constantly aware that he was being watched, that every move he made was potentially being analyzed by people who might wish him harm. The planning for the European tour moved forward smoothly, perhaps too smoothly. William had expected more resistance, or at least more questions about why he wanted to include certain stops. But his itinerary was approved without significant changes, which made him suspicious. Were they letting him go to Switzerland because they didn't know about the safety deposit box? Or were they letting him go because they wanted to see what he would do? 3 days before the scheduled departure, something happened that nearly derailed everything. William received a call from a senior government official requesting an urgent private meeting. The official, Sir Malcolm Green, was someone William had known for years, seemingly trustworthy figure who had served multiple prime ministers. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon at a location outside the palace, a private club where discretion was guaranteed. William's first instinct was to refuse, to cite scheduling conflicts or other obligations. His mother's warning echoed in his mind about not trusting anyone based solely on their position or apparent loyalty. But refusing such a meeting would itself raise suspicions. He agreed to attend, but not before taking precautions. He told Catherine exactly where he was going and when he expected to return. He arranged for Thomas to know his location, a subtle way of having someone outside the official channels aware of his whereabouts. And he made sure his phone was fully charged and had location tracking enabled, something he could activate if needed. The private club was in an old building in central London, the kind of place where powerful men had been making deals and sharing secrets for centuries. William was shown to a private room on the 3rd floor, wood-paneled and dimly lit, with portraits of stern-looking men staring down from the walls. Sir Malcolm was already there, seated in a leather chair with a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Your Royal Highness, thank you for coming," Sir Malcolm said, rising to greet him. "Please sit. Can I offer you a drink?" William declined the drink and took a seat across from the older man. He kept his posture relaxed but alert, ready to leave at the first sign of real danger. Sir Malcolm settled back into his chair, studying William with eyes that seemed to see far more than they should. "I'll get straight to the point," Sir Malcolm began. "There have been some concerns raised about your upcoming trip to Europe, specifically about one of your planned stops." William felt his heart rate increase, but kept his expression neutral. "Oh, which stop would that be?" "Switzerland." Sir Malcolm took a sip of his whiskey. "It's come to our attention that you've requested a rather unusual amount of private time during your visit there. No press, no official engagements for several hours. That's not typical of these tours." "I thought some personal time would be nice," William replied evenly. "It's been a demanding few months, and I'd like a few hours to simply be a private citizen rather than a public figure." "Surely that's not unreasonable." "Of course not," Sir Malcolm agreed, but his tone suggested he didn't entirely believe the explanation. "However, given the current political climate and security concerns, we simply want to ensure that you're not planning anything that might put you at risk or create diplomatic complications." There was something in the way he said it that made William's skin crawl. It wasn't quite a threat, but it wasn't entirely innocent either. It was as if Sir Malcolm was warning him that his activities were being monitored and that he should reconsider whatever he was planning. "I appreciate the concern," William said carefully. "But I assure you, I'm not planning anything that would cause problems. I simply want a few hours of privacy." "Is that truly so suspicious?" Sir Malcolm leaned forward slightly. "Your Royal Highness, I'm going to speak frankly because I believe you deserve honesty. There are people in very high places who have certain expectations about how the monarchy should conduct itself. They believe in discretion, in maintaining appearances, in not asking too many questions about matters that are best left in the past." The words sent a chill down William's spine. This was it, the confirmation that his mother's fears had been well-founded. Sir Malcolm wasn't speaking hypothetically. He was delivering a message, a warning disguised as friendly advice. "And if someone chooses not to meet those expectations," William asked quietly, "then that person may find that life becomes unnecessarily complicated." Sir Malcolm's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "Your mother, God rest her soul, was a wonderful woman. But she sometimes had difficulty understanding the importance of discretion. She asked questions that disturbed people, pursued matters that were better left alone. It created problems for everyone, including herself." William stood up abruptly, anger flooding through him. "Are you suggesting that my mother's death was anything other than a tragic accident?" Sir Malcolm remained seated, unruffled by William's reaction. "I'm suggesting nothing of the sort. I'm simply pointing out that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are unpredictable. Your mother made choices that put her in vulnerable positions, and tragically, she paid the price. I would hate to see history repeat itself." The threat was unmistakable now. William realized that this meeting was a test. They knew he had been asking questions, possibly even knew about the letter from his mother. They were trying to gauge how much he knew and how far he was willing to push. His response in this moment would determine what happened next. He forced himself to calm down, think strategically rather than emotionally. If he showed too much anger or defiance, they might see him as a threat that needed to be neutralized. But if he appeared too compliant, they would know he was hiding something. He needed to strike a balance, to seem chastened, but not defeated. "I understand," William said finally, his voice controlled. "I have no intention of creating problems or pursuing matters that don't concern me. My trip to Switzerland is exactly what I said it is. A chance for some personal time away from the spotlight. Nothing more." Sir Malcolm studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'm glad we understand each other. You're a smart man, Your Royal Highness, with a bright future ahead of you. It would be a shame if anything jeopardized that future." The meeting ended shortly after, and William left the club feeling shaken. The mask of casual friendliness had slipped just enough for him to see the machinery underneath. There were people who had power, who had secrets they wanted to protect, and who were willing to threaten even a member of the royal family to maintain their control. When he returned to the palace, Catherine was waiting for him. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know. They went to their private quarters where they could speak freely, and William recounted the entire conversation. "They know we're planning something," Catherine said when he finished. "Or at least they suspect. What do we do now?" William paced the room, his mind working through possibilities. "We go ahead with the trip as planned, but we need to be even more careful than we thought. If they're watching us this closely, we can't give them any reason to think the Switzerland stop is important." Over the next 2 days, they adjusted their strategy. William made a show of being annoyed about having to include Switzerland in the tour, suggesting to his schedulers that he would prefer to skip it if possible. He complained about the weather in Zurich, the limited, interesting sights. Anything to make it seem like Switzerland was the last place he wanted to be. It was a small bit of misdirection, but it might help throw off anyone who was watching. The day of departure arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle. William kissed his children goodbye, holding them a little longer than usual, trying not to think about the risks he was taking. Catherine would stay behind with the children this time, both to maintain normalcy and to ensure that if something did happen to William, the children would still have one parent. The tour began in France, then moved to Belgium. William went through the motions of his official duties, smiling for cameras and making speeches, but his mind was constantly on Switzerland. Finally, after 3 days, they arrived in Zurich. The official events went smoothly. William toured a hospital, met with Swiss officials, attended a dinner with business leaders, and then came the window of private time he had requested. His security team was told he wanted to visit a private art gallery that a friend had recommended, a perfectly plausible activity that required minimal protection detail. Instead, William made his way to the bank his mother had mentioned in her letter. It was a small, discreet institution in the old part of the city, the kind of place that specialized in privacy for wealthy clients. He entered alone, having convinced his security to wait outside, saying he was meeting with a potential donor who valued extreme discretion. Inside, William approached a clerk and provided the name his mother had given him and the password from their childhood bedtime stories. The clerk's expression remained neutral as he verified the information, then led William to a private viewing room. A few minutes later, the clerk returned with a safety deposit box and left William alone. His hands trembled as he opened the box. Inside were several folders filled with documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. William spent the next hour going through everything, his horror growing with each page he turned. His mother had compiled extensive evidence of a network of individuals within the government, military, and even the royal household who were involved in activities ranging from illegal surveillance to influence, peddling to far worse. There were photographs of secret meetings, copies of classified documents that should never have been accessible to her, and detailed notes about conversations she had overheard or been told about. The picture that emerged was of a shadow government within the government, a group of powerful individuals who believed they were above the law and who viewed the monarchy as a tool to be controlled rather than an institution to serve. Most damning of all were documents suggesting that his mother's investigation had been discovered, that a decision had been made to silence her permanently. The word accident appeared in quotes in several places, as if the writers knew perfectly well that what they were planning was anything but accidental. William felt sick as he read. His mother had known, had understood the danger she was in, and had continued anyway because she believed the truth needed to be exposed. And now that burden had fallen to him. He couldn't ignore what he had found, but he also understood the magnitude of what he was facing. These were people with immense power and resources, people who had already shown they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. He carefully photographed every document with his phone, then returned everything to the box. He couldn't take the originals with him, too risky if he was searched. But the photographs would be enough to begin building a case, assuming he could find someone trustworthy enough to help him. As he left the bank, the weight of what he now knew pressed down on him like a physical burden. His mother's warning had been more than justified. The danger was real, immediate, and far more extensive than he had imagined.